Unmute the mic.
Do you want me to get started?
Yep, yep, and your slides are here.
Okay, hello. No worries. I believe this is your last lecture for COMP1531. So it is just a bonus lecture where I'll be covering just some more software management tools or more complex ones and just going over some industry experience. So I was recently a student that graduated in computer science, and I did my undergraduate at UNSW. Sometimes, in my opinion, the reason why we learn stuff gets lost in teaching, and it's not always explicitly clear why what we are getting taught is important. So I'm here to impart some knowledge of why the stuff in 1531 that you may have learnt is important to you and your degree and maybe your job in the future. So just hopefully these are things that you have probably seen before. They are topics or ideas that have been explored in the COMP1531 project. At least that's what the course has tried to do. So why do we teach an iterative approach to implementing software? So your project is built in essentially 3 or 4 iterations, and every time they release an iteration, you have to essentially build on what you had before, either by extending it or modifying it to be slightly better. They also encourage you or enforce that you have to do code reviews in the form of merge request reviews. So every time when someone wants to commit some brand new code into your main branch or your master branch, it has to be reviewed by members of your team essentially. We also encourage you to do collaboration with other software engineers through, I think the key one is probably stand-ups. So you would either synchronously or asynchronously meet up with your group members, and you would essentially update each other where you are at completing your work, or if you're blocked, or if you need help, etc. We have also slightly covered documentation, so whether that's within code, so documenting your code so that other group members know how to use your bit of functions that you've written, or even application documentation, such as like the swagger.yaml file, which describes the backend interface that is needed by the front end in order for the full application to work. I believe 1531 also covers continuous integration very briefly to just showcase how this tool is useful maybe. And in terms of management tools, you have probably also used GitLab issue boards as well. So I guess the question is, are any of these concepts that I just mentioned actually important in industry? Since I listed them, every single one of these points that I've mentioned, I sort of use in my day-to-day job at Atlassian. So I'll be briefly going through my background. So I guess why am I an authority to speak about this? So I was a student at UNSW. I graduated in 2023 at the end of last year. I've also been tutoring in CSE since 2022, mostly in a course called Object-Oriented Programming, or the Art of Software Design, based on who you ask. I've also worked as a software engineer in a student project called UNSW Redback Racing, and I'll be using that as like a case study, showcasing the project management tools that I will be going through today. And I've also started as a full stack engineer at Atlassian since the start of this year. So the pictures at the bottom are essentially my time at UNSW Redback Racing. I was on a team called Data Acquisitions, which is basically we're supposed to acquire data from the car live. So Redback Racing is when you build like a race car and essentially you race it on a track. And our job was to collect live telemetry and then sort of stream it onto some user interface or front end. And the middle image is essentially the data collection software, or what we call the box that collects all of the telemetry on the car and essentially just streams it to cloud using like Wi-Fi or like 4G. and then it eventually appears up on a website that looks like on the left-hand side, or a Grafana dashboard on the right-hand side. So why do we use project management tools? So within your project, hopefully you have seen some benefits to using GitLab issues for project management, whether that's the ability to track how well you are on your way to finishing the iteration, or how much more work you essentially have to do. So if you're like 2 days away from iteration 3 being due, and your to-do list is still like 30 out of 30 tasks, that probably means that you have a lot of work to do within the next 2 days. So hopefully it looks like most of the tasks have been completed on your to-do list. Otherwise, yes, you are probably really behind. It also helps with knowing who's doing what at, I guess, each day in the project. So if you have a GitLab issues board, you're able to track that this person is currently working on this issue or this ticket on the board, and it's currently, in progress or in review, or it's been completed, and so on. Essentially, the project management tools I am covering today will just be an extension of the GitLabs board, but it will just include some extra nice features that would be beneficial in a larger team or in a company scenario. So the two tools that you may have heard before that are pretty common in the software industry, from Atlassian at least, is Jira and Confluence. Jira is most similar to a GitLab issues board, where essentially you have maybe a Kanban style board. So you would have like 3 columns or 4 columns. You will have like a to-do, in progress, in review, and a completed column. And essentially every ticket is just a small task that has to be completed for this project to end. Jira has a bunch of different names, such as Jira Product Discovery, Jira Service Management, and Jira Software. The main one we'll be talking about today is just Jira Software, which is aimed at software engineers in terms of management. Confluence is essentially a tool that accompanies Jira. It essentially is a collaboration tool, so you can sort of think of it as Google Docs, and a way of collecting all of your notes, all of your design notes, all of the documentation in sort of one single place. And I'll be doing a demo about this later. So in terms of university context, you will actually use these tools, Jira and Confluence, in the following courses. So the Senge workshops 1 and 2, and also in the capstone project, COMP1531 or 9900, which is its other course code. Okay, so I'm going to use UNSW Redback Racing as like a case study. So the brief TLDR of UNSW Redback Racing is essentially you build a formula style racing car every year. So in the first image, that's what their 2024 car looks like. And essentially you take that built car and you go to competition in Melbourne, and you compare how it performs compared to other universities who also are doing the same thing. At the bottom here is just an image of everyone that went last year in 2023. There was a lot of us, and yep. So at least in UNSW, we have a really, really large team of 150 students, which is actually a lot of people. That's like the size of like a pretty much small course in UNSW, and someone has to manage them, or somehow in essentially 11 months, we have to go from nothing to a built car every year, and we have 150 personnel to essentially manage. There's 7 technical departments and 3 business departments, and also an operations and executive team that helps manage and essentially get to the end goal, which is having a car to race in December. So my main point here is that 150 people is a lot of people. That is essentially the size of a medium-sized company, I believe, by definition. And the key thing I want to highlight here is that organization and time management is important. If you don't have a car by 11 months, you won't be able to go to comp, and essentially all of the effort that everyone has put in is essentially wasted. So time management and organization is important. So how can we sort of do that using tools like Jira and Confluence? So Jira is essentially a complex version of GitLab issues. It just has a bunch of extra features. So in this case, what I'm showcasing is the timeline feature in Jira, where essentially you have a bunch of different smaller goals that you want to achieve, which we call epics. And then there's like a timeline that you can sort of see how well you are at, or how well you're going to reach that goal by maybe December. There's also other features in Jira, such as a backlog. So at least in GitLab issues, every issue you create, I guess you have the idea that you're going to address it. But when you get to maybe like a larger project where there's more people, sometimes there are tickets that may never be completed just because like the priority isn't there, or like the business goals aren't to address these smaller issues or maybe smaller bugs. So there's a backlog that essentially is just a bunch of tickets that either haven't been triaged or will never get completed because of business goals. There's also this active sprints board, which essentially looks like the GitLab board. Essentially, it's like a to-do list. It's got columns like to-do, in progress, review, blocked, PR submitted, and completed. In Jira as well, there's the ideas of issues, stories, and epics. So there's just like terminology associated with it in terms of like what each one is. Essentially, a quick definition of all three is epics are generally a large body of work and could be like an individual project itself. And an epic is usually consists of a bunch of stories, and stories usually consist a bunch of issues. However, this isn't always strictly followed by any one company or any one entity that uses Jira. So it's kind of on you to define what each is. So a story is usually written from the requirements of the end user. I believe this is what iteration 3 requires you to do, where you're required to seek out, end users or people who are going to use your software and list their requirements or their wants and their needs as something to implement for your iteration 3. And then issues are essentially small work items. So those would be like individual functions such as register a user in your project and so on. So I can give a demo quickly of a board in Jira. So this is essentially what a Jira board looks like. It's quite messy at the moment because there's just a lot of people doing work at the same time. So if we just click on an issue like reduce ECS costs, we can see that the description here is the aim is to reduce the cost to at least half of what we're paying in AWS. So someone called Brian Huang is essentially assigned this ticket and they're currently working on it. And if they get to a point where their work is done, they would just drag it to the done column and everyone else can sort of see that they have completed their work and so on. So I'm just going to move this back. There's also the backlog that I talked about. So these are just like work that people have created, for future work potentially, or even just like bugs that need to be eventually addressed, but aren't the priority right now just because we don't need to fix that specific issue to go to competition in the next month. There's also like a calendar that just lists more information, the timeline like I talked about, and so on. So I guess another benefit of Jira is that it's not only used by software engineers, it's used by, more business-oriented people as well. So a key part in Redback Racing is procurement, which basically means that you need to buy materials or you need to buy components for the car, and being on time on getting those components is essentially vital, because if you don't have it, you can't really use it to build the said car. So what Redback Racing has also done is they have a board called procurement, and essentially every ticket on the board is an item that someone in the team needs, and it's someone's job to procure it. And a great way of, showcasing the visibility of what the status of each item is by using a Jira board. So we can see here that there's a backlog of, items that people want. There's an abandoned one, so I assume that they no longer need it. There's people who can request, so someone in a different, team or in a different department can essentially come here, create it, and the person who owns this board will get notified, and then eventually when they get to, processing it, they'll just drag the ticket around based on its current status. So there's like an in review, which probably means that like someone has to sign off on before actually spending the money. There's the approved, there's also the purchase column, and then also in transit if the company has sent the item and they're waiting for it as well. So the emphasis here is that it's not only just used by software engineers or technical people. Jira is also used by business people, and yes. So Confluence is just like a neat tool to collect a bunch of documentation, historical decisions, or just it's a nice place to put all your documents in one place and render it, in a pretty way. So if I just have a look at, my old team's Confluence page, essentially this is the landing page, which just describes what the team is about and how to use the space and the team structure. On the side, we can see a tree of different pages that exist. So something I mentioned was it's a place to hold historical data as well. So a lot of decisions are made, a lot of decisions are important to be made and documented. What I mean by that is the people in Redback rotate out fairly quickly, because eventually once you graduate, you kind of have to leave the team, and then a new undergraduate engineer joins as well. So that means that knowledge leaves the team extremely fast. So documenting key decisions in a place where it could eventually be searched for is very useful to the new engineers who join, and they might not want to make the same mistakes that previous engineers have already done. So in this case, if you document everything in one place, there's a neat search feature that you can use in Confluence, and you can search for key terminology, and then new members who join the team can have a read of those decision documents, and they can go from there. So just showcasing what we have in admin, at least for meeting minutes, which is something that I believe you're supposed to do in the project. If it opens, we can see here that we have at least 4 years worth of meeting minutes just for archival purposes. So if a decision needs to be, if a new design decision wants to be made, we can just double check that in a previous meeting, we haven't made the same decision before, or we haven't moved away from it for a specific reason. So if I just showcase what a document looks like. So the team did a midweek stand-up on the 7th of November, and this is just generally what it looks like. So we have a bunch of attendees. Apologies for people who weren't able to make it. They have a monthly goals, so just to track each epic, which is just a small project that leads to the eventual goal of going to competition. And it has action items, which is empty. There's just an embed of the Jira document, the Jira board or Jira timeline, and the discussion is essentially what each person did in the said week or since the last meeting minutes. Okay, so I don't think there's any questions, so I'll just keep on charging ahead. Okay, so that was just Redback as an example, a student organization within UNSW. So we'll talk about my team now at Atlassian. So I recently joined as a full stack engineer, as a graduate full stack engineer at the start of this year. I work primarily on a platform team, and a platform team basically means that I make reusable components or features that other teams in Atlassian will use, specifically product teams. So when I say a product team, I mean Jira, Confluence, Trello, or even Bitbucket. So I make reusable things, reusable code that other teams will eventually consume and then use in their products. So what I have been working on for maybe the last few months is on a package called Smart Cards or Smart Links. Essentially on Confluence, if you highlight over a link, it is like a pretty looking thing, and there's also a hover card with a bunch of actions that you can do on it. That whole feature is owned by my team, and it's essentially shared around all of the Atlassian products to create like a similar experience. My team name is called TWG Bandicoots, or also known as Linking Platform and Experiences. The whole idea of linking platform is that we are essentially provide an experience that allows people to easily navigate to other products that they are using in their own company. So we are a pretty large team now. So there's essentially 20 members in our team, specifically 15 engineers, I think, 1 product manager, 2 designers, and then 2 managers. So that is, in my opinion, not a small team to work with day to day. So in our Slack channel, there's essentially 20 people, and there's just a bunch of messages every day. And there's like different contexts and a lot of things going on at the same time. So what I mean by a lot of things going at the same time is the blue circle is essentially all of us as the 20 engineers, and there are essentially maybe 5 or even more projects going on at the same time that people may need to know or be somewhat like they would need to understand very briefly about all these other projects, even though they're working on a specific one. So how does a large team in a large company sort of manage this main project, or like these different projects that are going at the same time? We also practice something called agile development in in Atlassian. This is also briefly explored, I think, in COMP1531. Essentially, the whole point of agile is like an iterative approach to developing, and it's supposed to be a better way of, I guess, creating software, wherein you take like small 2-week sprints, and then you keep iterating on your original product to make it better and better every sprint. We also practice DevOps within Atlassian as well, which is also briefly explored in 1531 through the idea of continuous integration and also continuous deployment. There's a question, what tech stack do you use? So in Atlassian, the primary tech stacks for front end is just React, and the backends are generally either Node.js or Java/Kotlin, I think, or any JDK backend. Okay, so I guess I presented before, we are a large team. There's a bunch of different things going on at the exact same time. How do we all keep updated with each other? So there's this thing called software rituals in agile development. Essentially, a ritual is just like a common meeting that most of the team will attend, and it's usually to foster collaboration or like a synchronization of knowledge between each individual member of the said team. So here's an example of what like a 2-week sprint would look like at Atlassian. Mondays are usually left with no meetings, which is really nice. So you can just focus on getting work done that day. And then every other day, we essentially have a stand-up for about 20 minutes, where essentially, every engineer on the team spends about 1 or 2 minutes talking about what they did the day before or the week before, and they talk about whether they need help or they are blocked or they are just unsure about something. So it's like the perfect time to, I guess, understand what everyone else is doing and sort of get like updated where they are at in their own mini project. So at the start of every sprint, we generally have something called a retrospective, or actually the end of every sprint, you would usually have a retrospective. And the idea of a retrospective is to essentially go over, how did the last week, or how did the last 2 weeks of the sprint go? Are there any good things? Did we achieve our goals? Are there any pain points? Are there any ideas to foster better collaboration? So something that was recently suggested in my team was to do more, I guess, team games or online games to sort of foster better team morale. I think we had problems with just getting blocked by external factors that aren't really in our control, such as like failing CIs or failing pipelines, so we're unable to merge our code and master. And we're also the good things of, we completed a project, or this specific thing in the team is going really well. So something that we might do is essentially a retrospective thing. It's like I think a tool called Better Retros, and essentially you just have 3 columns: what went well in the last 2 weeks, what didn't go well, and then any new things or any new ideas that could be implemented in the team for improvement. And it's the responsibility of everyone in the team to sort of participate and sort of present their ideas of like what they thought happened in the last 2 weeks and so on. Usually after a retro, we have something called sprint planning, and sprint planning is essentially just planning the next 2 weeks of work and what the next 2 week of work will eventually lead to in terms of our goals. So it could be like finish off this project, or finish off this ticket that is due I don't know, by a certain day, and so on. So every other day we usually have stand up, and because we're just like a team that's also in a larger organization, so there's like other teams as well, we might have like a monthly demo where I guess each team joins like a Zoom call, and we all present like some major or like some small thing that we've done, just so we understand that like, hey, this team has been working on this, and this now new feature or new experience or new product exists. During the mid part of our sprint, we have something called sprint grooming. Essentially, during the sprint, a bunch of new tickets will be created and basically placed in the backlog. And someone has to go through that and eventually, determine the importance or the priority of said tickets. So instead of like, I guess, putting this responsibility on one specific person in the team, we sort of do it collaboratively as a team. Also because sometimes like the said tickets are created and not enough information is provided in the description, and only a specific person on the team will sort of know that domain of knowledge. So it's kind of important that everyone joins together, and we can sort of estimate how long would this ticket take in something called story points, or what's the priority of this ticket. Does it need to be completed immediately, or is it something that we can just place in the backlog, and whenever we have time to get around to it, we will eventually complete it, and so on. So some fun thing that I like in what we used to do in backlog grooming was essentially this idea of agile poker. So everyone would join in on this like live session, and essentially when you put a ticket on the left hand side, you could just vote for like, is it 5 points of work, or like 3 points, or 1 point, and we also go through like whether if there's enough descriptions or if enough clarity to actually complete this ticket. Okay. I don't think there's other questions. So the last thing I wanted to cover is the idea of code reviews in industry. So if you haven't seen the importance of like merge requests yet, once you get into, I guess, a company that has like a large code base with like maybe more than like 10 engineers working on the same thing, you may understand how annoying it is if someone just like immediately merges code into something that you work on, and it causes something to break, and then you're awakened at 3 a.m. because the thing that you technically own is now broken and it has to be fixed immediately. So the whole idea, or the whole point of merge requests or code reviews, is to ensure that whatever code is being merged into the master branch is of like a particular quality and doesn't have, I guess, bugs in it. So it's essentially something that you will have to do once you get into industry, especially if you're working in a large code base. So I have like a screenshot of a pull request that I have made at Atlassian. Essentially, I am modifying essentially other people's code. Because I'm a platform team, I have to, whenever we want to make changes to like our components, we sometimes have to go into the places that use our code and sort of modify that as well. So in this case, I am modifying a lot of other people's code that I don't directly own. So what I have to do is I essentially have to get every team, or at least one person from every team, to sign off and say that this code change I'm making in their code is, I guess, okay with them. So the idea is that if a problem occurs once I've merged it, I can at least say that like this person signed off on it and I didn't directly just merge stuff into their code base. And the idea of code reviews is to also maintain a specific quality of code, but as like an entry-level engineer, it's also a great place to learn how to do things or how to code things in a better way. Because you're coming in with like the least amount of knowledge possible, whoever's reviewing your code can generally suggest like maybe a better way of doing it, or maybe suggest something that you have missed while making your pull request or merge request. And I just have examples of here from this specific pull request of someone suggesting something and a conversation occurring. And then lastly, just want to reiterate that CI/CD, or like develop operations, is heavily used in industry. So for a specific pull request to be merged at Atlassian, you need to run essentially all these CIs, all these pipelines, and they all have to pass before you're able to merge code into master. And this is just like a random screenshot I took of like how many pipelines there are for this specific pull request. You can see that there's a lot, and some of them take more than an hour to run. So it is a very pain point, but it's also important to ensure that the code that you're merging into master actually works with the rest of the code base. And sometimes in a really, really large code base where I guess there's a lot of dependency from one file to another, it's kind of impossible to run all of the tests on your like mini laptop because there's just so many. And sometimes you make like a change that you don't think will affect something else, but it actually does. So it's really important that like all of the tests in the entire code base is run before it's merged into master, because sometimes you might have some unintended consequences that you may not realize just because you've never looked at this specific test before. Okay, that's my end of my spiel. Does anyone have any questions?
Like any question about software engineering, not only about like project management, but also if you have any question about internship or job market or anything, it's a great opportunity to ask questions. Waiting for the online students.
Yes, sure.
Did you do any internships before you got your full-time?
So the question is, did I do any internships before I got my full-time offer? I didn't do a internship per se, but I did work like part-time as a software engineer at a smaller company. But no, I didn't have time to do an internship, mostly because I dropped out of a double degree fairly quickly. So I just didn't have time to do an internship. But generally, like a lot of people that I've spoken to generally do internships before they get a full-time role. But it's not something that you have to do per se. Like you can make up a lot of what you'll get from an internship with like other experiences. So if you have like projects to showcase in your like resume, or you do other things like teaching, or you do other things like being in a like a student project and like achieving like some sort of goal and so on. So you don't explicitly have to do an internship to get a full-time position. I'm not speaking specifically for Atlassian, that's just like in general. Yes, sure.
I kind of enjoy programming in C far more than JavaScript, but
Yep.
what is the job market for C?
That's a good question. So the question is, I enjoy programming in C much more than I enjoy programming in JavaScript. What is the job market like? So I am not fully aware of the job market, but I would say that JavaScript or like front-end development or web development probably make up majority of the jobs currently. So the easiest way to probably get a job is to learn how to make a website and how to code a backend. Like most of the jobs I see on LinkedIn are essentially just doing that. But to answer your question of if you like lower level programming such as C, C++, you might go into something called embedded programs or like embedded programming, or you might do something that interfaces with hardware directly where a lower level language is needed to perform operations as such. So yes, it will generally just be embedded programming, or like operating systems are usually written in C or C++, or like, that's like a domain I don't really know too much because I just sit in JavaScript land where it's like high level languages and everything.
This is a question online.
Yeah. Yes. Since I didn't have any internships, what other experience related to tech would you put on your resume when applying to Atlassian? So I basically listed everything I had before. I was a tutor for CSE. I worked part-time at a like a space analytics company as a full stack engineer, and I also was in a student project at UNSW. Those were my main experiences that showcased I guess my ability. So the student project, I was able to show them like the website we did and how like I guess telemetry data flowed live from the car to like AWS and then onto your browser. And yes. Are there any other questions? Yes, go for it.
Would you recommend someone try, like, say JavaScript, just try reading past the JavaScript, or just go and familiarize yourself with like multiple different languages and just try to get familiar with different languages rather than try to master them?
So the question is, should you focus primarily on one language or should you learn a bunch of them? I don't think there's a specific yes or no answer. Like if you had to pick a language to focus on and you wanted a job, as I said before, most jobs are probably web development. So you would probably have a really good chance of getting a web development job if you knew like JavaScript, React, or TypeScript. So I guess if you wanted to do like a web development job, you would primarily focus on, you know, JavaScript or TypeScript just because that's like the common language used for like web development. Yeah, it's like if you want to do backend, then you might focus more on like backend related languages like Java, Kotlin, Go maybe. But generally, in my opinion, if you know how to use one language, you likely know how to use it in a different language. So like all the knowledge that you have learnt maybe in JavaScript can easily transfer to another high level language like Java fairly quickly. So it's pretty easy to pick up a new language. It's more so like your ability to, I guess, design the code well, or like decode a problem and, you know, complete this problem, or like attack this problem in like small bits, and your way of like thinking is probably more important than mastering a specific language. I think as an entry-level engineer, you don't really need mastery over any language, but as you move up into like a higher position at a company, you generally want to specialize a bit more so that you are, I guess, more useful in this certain domain than someone who's like a jack of all trades that knows everything. But I think being an entry-level engineer, you're probably okay being a jack of all trades because it just means that you have a lot of skills in different parts of the software programming stuff. How did I get my first time? How did you get the first part-time job? I just applied on LinkedIn, and they gave me an interview, and I got the job. So like you kind of need a good resume. I don't really know what the definition of good is anymore, since it's been a while since I've had one. And I think what I had back then in 2022 was just like a showcase of my university projects and any side projects I had.
What kind of university project and side project?
So I did put down my 1531 backend project that was written in Python that I did in 2020. I also put down, I think my 2511, my object-oriented programming thing, and there was just some other side projects that I had on GitHub that I could just showcase as well. But generally, I think usually when you're getting interviewed, it's probably like a business person rather than someone technical, so it kind of depends. I think I was just quite lucky to get my first part-time job. Any more questions?
Yeah, I think that's all the questions.
Oops. Would you like me to stop the stream?
Cool. Yeah, otherwise, that's all for today. Good luck on your iterations today. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask on the forum. Did you introduce yourself? Name? This is Alvin.
Oh, I did forget that. Yes. My name's Alvin. I'm also a tutor in 1531, so yeah.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Thank you so much. A pretty short bonus lecture.